all had enough time to watch the Book of Boba Fett, and either you loved it, liked it, thought it was meh, or you hated it. But if you're like me, you've rewatched every episode and completely binged the show as you love seeing Boba Fett again. Tamara Morrison, and also the dire need of new Star Wars content, whilst the Star Wars movies seem to be a little bit on hiatus. I loved so many parts of the show, as you could probably tell from my reactions. It was filled with awesome scenes throughout. It hit your original and prequel nostalgia buttons and played a symphony on your heartstrings in some of the scenes. It filled the gap after all those years of speculation as to what happened to Boba Fett and how he escaped the Sarlacc pit. I love that it intertwined itself on multiple occasions with The Mandalorian, bringing over characters previously set up in that show, as well as the continuation of plots which were established with our boy Din Djarin. And overall, I think it worked. However, was it also great? Were there missed opportunities? And my favourite question of all, would George Lucas have made the Book of Boba Fett like that? Returning to what can be considered the heart of all of Star Wars, Tatooine, it's easy just to let your hair down and cast a blind eye to certain things which were going on in the show. So, being the massive Star Wars fan that I am, someone who pretty much thinks about Star Wars all the time, so much that sometimes I think I would be
a great asset
to the Lucasfilm storytelling group, it began to dawn upon me that I kept making changes in my head as to how I would have liked to have done each episode, to the point I had enough ideas to make a video on all of the missed opportunities I feel like were very apparent in this show, except that one episode courtesy of Bryce Dallas Howard. So I thought it would be fun to share all my ideas and show you some simple changes that would have made the Book of Boba Fett more epic and hopefully more universally loved by all Star Wars fans. But just before we delve in, know this, that all the changes that I come up here come straight from what I believe George Lucas would have created, because he is
the key to all this.
Something I think that really worked for Boba Fett was his flashbacks whilst in the Bacta tank. Seeing what happened to him on Tatooine from the Sarlacc pit was amazing. And with the Tusken Raiders, it really felt like you were getting two stories in one episode, which I thought worked really well. However, I do believe there was a bit of pacing issues where the story really felt slow in places and elongated scenes which really didn't serve much purpose to the plot as a whole, when we should have spent more crucial time learning more about Boba Fett's past, which would have had ramifications for the immediate threat building on Tatooine. It took a long time to get to just one single end on the fight of Tatooine, which somehow was regarded as a war. In reality, it seemed like a single battle between endless Pike supporting actors and no consequences for the people defending Mos Espa. It wasn't really a war. I feel like some slight adjustments could have been made here, which would have developed Boba Fett's character in a way we've never seen before, and added a lot of depth to his motives, which seemed really lacking throughout the series. I wouldn't have the Tusken Raiders as part of the flashbacks. Instead, the first 3 episodes should focus with the Tuskens and Boba as the main part of the story. I think the Sand People scenes were very, very strong and emotional enough to really build upon Boba's character and change his way of thinking from a ruthless bounty hunter to the one who wants something different and change, an enlightenment, if you will.
Serendipitous visit.
This would be evident when Boba is finally accepted by the Sand People tribe. He begins his dreams of his previous years as one of the galaxy's greatest bounty hunters. Every time Boba is exhausted and tries to rest, then in comes the flashback, which would be quite a long sequence. Each flashback would be of Boba doing a bounty hunting job in the past. We see him at full strength, as it were, the peak of his career, and we see him put the fear in people across the galaxy as a ruthless bounty hunter. His reputation constantly precedes him. This will give wider scope to his galactic bounty hunts and give us great opportunity to seek all new planets and expand the universe. However, each successful trip, the story begins to tell us that Boba has had it tough. Also, what I think would be truly awesome and a great nod to young Boba is to have Daniel Logan to don the Boba Fett armor and play Boba in his slightly younger bounty hunting years. I would have loved to see that so much, as we would have seen both the Fett actors back at work together playing this complicated character. By using these flashbacks, you would simultaneously solidify Boba Fett as one of the best bounty hunters in the galaxy, but also act as a serious character building, which see Boba in his prime, so it doesn't diminish so many of what us perceive Boba to be like, which still see him catching people, flying around in Slave One, and generally being fearless. The cunning, ruthless success Boba had in the past, post-Sarlacc pit, Boba begins to change his perspective on life, as in his dreams he begins to see what he's doing to people in the galaxy. What he perceived to be perfectly fine at the time begins to shift, especially as the Sand People, who are equally ruthless in nature, also have something Boba never had: loyalty, honor, protection, and family. And then the use of the loss of his father as the main flashback as to why he acted in the way he has throughout the years. Revenge and never letting Jango's passing go, a resentment which has twisted him, and it's through the Sand People he's realized this great discovery. I think this would be a clever way to show every time Boba rests or is in the Bacta tank, it's all about him being the Boba we know and dreamt of. And the final flashback before he's fully healed would be him working for Darth Vader on a couple of occasions. Perhaps one of the jobs Boba did so well, he became in favor with Darth Vader and acted as the reason why he was hired to hunt down Han Solo. I'm a devious, degenerate defender. So yeah, I think just a switch around of various things in here in regards to the flashbacks and turning the Tusken scene into the main part of the episode story, I really feel like this would have benefited Boba Fett's character growth and connected us to the character as we would see Boba change. And we understand why that's happening. He wanted something more in life. He's been so hell-bent to create a name for himself like his father. He's got eaten up by rage and resentment. He begins to see all of the misery he's created. I think the flashbacks, if changed, could have served a great purpose, and in hindsight seemed like a great missed opportunity. These 7 episodes are precious in time and would constantly bring us closer to Boba, his motives, his way of thinking, his past, and his future on Tatooine. It would have been an epic change. Now this is what I would classify as a minor change, though I believe it would have helped a lot with the immersion, made it a bit cooler and aided in broadening the scope of Tatooine. Including the Gamorrean guards was a touch of genius. Actually getting to see them again in action on Tatooine was even more awesome, and I didn't realise how fond and attached I'd become of Jabba's old Gamorrean guards. I didn't even care much after Luke had force choked them in episode 6. However, when they turned up, I thought, brilliant. Boba Fett is going to have his own small army of Gamorrean guards spread across his palace. However, there were only two Gamorrean guards to guard the whole of Jabba's palace. There only being 2, I think, was a bit of a missed opportunity here, as the story was calling out some muscle, Morians, and building up Boba Fett's influence and army. Though there only being just 2 reminds us of them in The Mandalorian, and no doubt were carried through to Boba Fett without the intention of making any more. To me, something small and insignificant like that for some reason has huge implications in my brain. I cannot help but think that while all the monsters, droids, and awesome ship effects were so good that I had to keep looking twice to see whether it's practical effects or not, why forego making more Gamorrean costumes? And this brings me on to George Lucas, something which I've said on so many occasions. The special features to Star Wars prequels were my childhood. I repeatedly watched them, and through those you can study George Lucas's way of making Star Wars. He was very much a John Hammond.
Spared no expense.
He innovated and constantly wanted you to feel immersed into whatever was happening on screen. So I feel like when it came to the Gamorrean guards, George Lucas probably would have said, put at least a dozen in there. Terrible impression. And then later in the show there would be a cool fight with them in it. Maybe it was a cost thing, maybe I'm reading too deep into this, but something little like 2 lonely Gamorrean guards took me out of it a bit and reminded me that this isn't a Star Wars film. It was a TV show, and because of that, such adjustments or decisions are made, and in this case, no more Gamorrean guards costumes were made. And that's what I think lets this show down on occasion. You have to go all out, knowing the bar was set so high by George Lucas and Dave Filoni in the Clone Wars. Adding more Gamorreans would have looked cooler, but also given Boba Fett a real presence of a leader on Tatooine, and not just blend into one guy walking around. The guards would have been amazing, seeing how their loyalties changed to protect Boba Fett and given Boba's palace some much needed protection. A small, simple change, but to me, really important to the overall immersion. We all know they were going to be on this list. It comes as no surprise that they were not a favourite of mine. I don't know who approved the designs and came up with the idea, but let's just say that they did not fit into Tatooine.
Not one bit.
You could argue, well, on Coruscant that fit in, and probably yes, that they might have flown in from there, yes. But the fact that you have to think up a story to give a reason as to why they're there as justification probably means they shouldn't be there.
Try spinning, that's a good trick.
There was one that grew on me slightly, which was the girl who looked like she was a Sith. However, every single one of them needed a drastic dirtying up and a costume change. However, the concept of the mods, I suppose, could have been turned into something cool. So this is what I would have done for them. It would have been way cooler if their bikes were junk speeders, modified with crude weapons, something fitting of Tatooine. I just can't understand what was going through the creator's mind during this creation. Because how can you get something so right on multiple occasions throughout the show and then come up with something like the modders? It now keeps me a little on edge, thinking future projects might have similar creations like modders cropping up. I think they could have been drastically improved if the modders were just people with junk weapons and machines they've made themselves. Then I think they wouldn't have caused the jarring discontent and the ultimate cringe dialogue. It might have given them a chance. Boba could have had some very interesting people part of his gang, but the mods were just a big no. Now I think with the show, the only thing that really jarred my enjoyment was the gang of mods. A group of youths who looked like they'd been created by someone who hadn't watched Star Wars and would probably be more for a type of sci-fi show the BBC didn't look after. The introduction of the mods completely changed the show for me. Even just seeing them stand there next to Boba Fett, they all look so out of place. I'll be intrigued to know who came up with the idea for them, but with a simple change they could have been something really cool and more fitting for the show. I feel they could have easily been replaced with a group of Tatooine aliens, or perhaps droids even. First change, I think the mods could have been more native to the planet to begin with, dirty, grubby and Tatooine-y. Instead of having their weird Back to the Future costumes and modifications that have cool Tatooine-like costumes, rags. And these groups of youths are exceptionally talented at modding machines, so that would be weapons, speeders and other vehicles. Quick like Jawas and being Tatooine locals that know their way around the settlements, by turning them into something that actually fits into the Star Wars universe, as opposed to almost feel like you're being taken for granted and will automatically like any old crap that's put on the screen. This mod gang could actually be quite endearing, visually cool and interesting to see, and be a great asset to Boba, whilst finding a father figure in Boba, and Boba looking after aspiring capable young ones, therefore developing further in his personality, continues to shift him into something new. I suppose whilst we're on the mods, you can't change them and leave their speeder bikes left alone. I think out of all the ships we've seen for Star Wars in the most recent years, and probably something George Lucas would have looked at on the board and then moved on. I don't want to talk about them too much, as I simply can't understand the thinking behind them. It just worries me a bit that someone could get it so wrong and not notice. My version, the mod bikes would be their cool speeder creations made from Tatooine junk that look rusty, that have cool features and sound awesome. I think with subtle changes with the modders and foregoing the bizarre cyborg look, the mods could have been the junkers who sound way cooler and would have been greatly benefiting for the show. All the time Boba spent rebuilding himself and creating a sacred bond with the Raiders, something we've never seen in Star Wars before, only to not have them appear again on screen later on in the show at the ending. I'm sure there could have been a great use for them, as the Pikes could have sent in more reinforcements, landed on the outskirts to avoid attack from Boba, to only then be completely ambushed by the Tusken Raiders at night, a night raid. And who is heading the battle? Boba. It would have been an awesome scene if he saw the overwhelming odds mustering against him on the outskirts of Mos Espa, feeling defeated and overpowered. His new bestowed sense of honor compels him to go fight for his people. By this point, we would have seen what a kick-ass bounty hunter Boba Fett would be, with all the flashbacks of his bounty hunting past. Nevertheless, the amount of pikes and the equipment they've landed on the planet is overwhelming. You feel like it's a one-way trip. However, Boba could have had a standoff with the pikes. Surrounded and ready to fight, the echo of the Tusken Raiders are heard in one direction from afar, then another getting closer, and then from the other side, until the whole place is echoing with Tusken Raiders, until they unleash hell on the Pike Syndicate and stand up with Boba Fett. It would have been an awesome payoff to what was previously established early on in the series, and a strong relationship built with the Tusken Raiders and Fett, but instead in the show they were used only to fuel Boba's anger for the Pikes. Perhaps, but even then I don't get that, because Boba didn't even go after the Pike leader to seek revenge. I found that really strange why Fennec Shand went instead. Now, it's not a massive change, this one, as I really like Fennec Shand. When we first got her in The Mandalorian, I wasn't so much of a fan, but her character development was interesting, and inevitably it drew me towards her. However, something which I've found on numerous occasions in this show is how Boba kept being sidelined and Fennec kept doing all the talking, to the point at the end of the show Boba didn't even get his revenge on the Mayor and the Pikes, the ones responsible for killing Boba's Tusken Raider tribes, the ones who saved him. Instead, Fennec went all Anakin Jedi Council chambers on everyone, so the conclusion felt a bit empty. I think it's cool that Boba Fett's got a number 2, but for me I would have made a slight change and taken a leaf out the Mandalorian's book. Our boy Din Djarin had friends, companions, but invariably it always ended up us just focusing on the Mando, which is why we connected with him so much. A man with a helmet on the most of the time, yet we were still able to shed a tear. Well, I was anyway. The same thing should have happened with Boba. More focus on him, see how he's feeling, hear him say his plans to other aliens when they're having their meeting. Let Boba save Fennec from certain scenes, showing that he actually cares for someone, rather than Fennec being used early on to save Boba. From that, I forgot I had a jetpack shield war scene. Just a little bit of adjustment to the character dynamics. I think Shan could have really boosted Boba in various scenes so we could connect more with him, which I feel was slightly needed. The thing that differentiates a TV show from a movie is the way it's made. A movie made by George Lucas, no expense spared. If he had a vision, he'd push people to make it happen, and that's how technology is evolved. Thing is, with TV shows, although the effects look truly incredible, especially with all the monsters, the same approach should be used for other aliens to make it different from seeing human-sized people dressed in human-sized masks everywhere. Dave Filoni and George Lucas explored alien species in the Clone Wars in a way we'd never seen before. All those aliens that cropped up, whether it be for a second's glance in the cantina or on board Darth Vader's Star Destroyer, you bet the Clone Wars show included them and turned these aliens into awesome characters, which to me are absolutely canon as to how they should look. Bossk is the perfect example. In Empire, he was 2.1 meters in height, imposing, awesome looking, definitely looked like an alien, and he and his Trandoshan species were brilliantly expanded upon in the Clone Wars.
What happened?
Now, in the Book of Boba Fett and the Mandalorian, the Trandoshans are included. However, the approach is they're human height now, just like every other Star Wars alien, so stick them in there and forget about how they're meant to look. So to me, even though this probably sounds really stupid, but it really takes me out of the show and is one of my main concerns with these Star Wars TV shows, and it kept happening throughout the Book of Boba Fett, to the point the fearsome 2-meter Trandoshans, sharp claws, no shoes, not to be messed with, turned out to look like wide-eyed fish faces, no match for Chrysanthemum, fully clothed with shoes, who just ended up doing a high school bundle on the Wookiee. The thing that differentiates a TV show from a movie is the way it's made. A movie made by George Lucas, no expense will be spared.
Spared no expense.
If he had a vision, he'd push people to make it happen, and that's how technology is evolved. Thing is, with the TV shows, although the effects look truly incredible, especially with the monsters, The same approach should be used for other aliens to make them different from seeing human-sized people dressed in human-sized masks everywhere. I always thought when it comes to Star Wars, there's the George Lucas way, and then the aliens are unique, interesting, and fit into the universe, and then there's the Doctor Who way. The aliens are literally a mask on a human, and that's it. You need to show it's a Star Wars show and go all in, especially if the movies are no longer being made. I feel there's always an avoidance for CGI characters, and I get it because of the great fear from for some reason. Personally, I always loved Jar Jar and the Gungans. However, George Lucas pushed the boundaries and technology is now so far forward. Why couldn't you put some full-size Trandoshans in there just so you don't diminish the coolness of the species by making them human-sized? The Rhodians, however, well, they looked amazing. But I think to improve these shows, either commit to CGI. We know it's fake, but it's not a problem for the sake of using practical effects to appease some people. Sometimes it's not always the best way to do it. If CGI is needed to make the Trandoshans imposing and awesome looking, I'd say go for it completely and stick to the original designs. If they're not able to do it or use them sparingly to save on costs, then I prefer them just to use a different alien. It's a small change like that which would have gone a long way in the Book of Boba Fett and would have most certainly felt more like a Star Wars vibe, adding visual interest whilst remaining true to the lore George Lucas created. Something I think could have been featured more was Slave One, basically Boba Fett's companion throughout all of his life, and I won't call it anything else because I'd consider that blasphemy towards our beloved Jango Fett, the bounty hunter who had the courage to fly into a pit of Jedi and fight the most powerful Jedi in the galaxy. Though I cannot help but think that so many problems stood in the way of Boba, which could have easily been resolved with him taking out Slave One for a spin. It would have perfectly worked seeing the Pikes send in more reinforcements to continue taking over the planet through the episodes. So they send in the ships to do this. I think this could have been a really cool scene to add. So perhaps one night Boba gets tipped off that a large mass of Pike reinforcements was amassing in space on Tatooine to be distributed in various parts of the planet, mainly Mos Espa. So Boba, whilst on the balcony looking over the Tatooine desert, decides to go out by himself. He gets into Slave One, he flies up into space and waits for them, maybe hovering near some orbiting space junk, pulling the classic Boba Fett move. And then when the Pikes arrive, Boba manages to take out the Pike reinforcements all in one night in an amazing space battle, just to show how resourceful and cunning Boba Fett still is, and it would give ample opportunity to hear this a couple more times. The next morning, FENNIC Shan noticed Slave One looks like it might need some repairing, which would make sense as to why the ship would now be grounded for the rest of the show, and Boba could tell her about his productive evening as she looks in with admiration to his commitment to now protecting the planet. A change like this would have been an epic way to show an actual sort of threat and a crime war going on Tatooine, instead of some unarmed Pikes supporting actor douche just walking out from a ship without any weapons and doing nothing. To me, they didn't pose a threat at all because there was just no justification for us to believe that there should be a threat early on in the show. But with a simple change of a continuation of them landing their own ships, fully armoured and hostile in nature, could have widened the picture a bit, increased the Pike threat, and 100% lended itself perfectly to some awesome space battles because, you know. Something seemed anticlimactic on the last episode. It didn't really feel like it built up to anything except a bit of a scrap between the Pikes. I think in order to fully utilize all the characters at this point, the whole thing should have quadrupled in size, at least, with Boba being the main focal point, and absolutely most definitely 100% without a doubt have the awesome moment with Boba and the Rancor. I never knew we needed to see something on that epic proportion until we got it. But I think there should have been some dogfights happening overhead, constantly reminding that the Pikes are looming over them, and would have been a good opportunity for Mando to go up and see them off in his N1 starfighter. However, being the last battle, the last episode, and potentially the last time Boba is used, then emotionally, Boba Fett should have been completely overwhelmed with the pikes to the point it's reduced to just him, Mando, Shand, a couple of the mods, and some of Mos Pelgo.
It's called Freetown now.
I mean Freetown. And most definitely Cobb Vanth. So it's all beginning to look a bit dire, so Boba makes a heroic speech. He talks about his past, where he's come from, what he's done, how he feels about it, basically emotionally recapping up with his journey throughout the series, and how he won't ever lay down his arms for Tatooine, the people, and something he's never had before, his home. A final showdown occurs at night, and we see Boba completely destroy the pikes, and literally the whole of Tatooine's residents come out from hiding and join in the fight with whatever weapons they have. It's almost like an epic Star Wars medieval castle siege. The battle is nearly over, and Boba, Mando, Shand, Vanth, and the rest surround the Pike boss and his last remnants. Pike promise to retreat and swear never to return to the planet. Boba is smart and says bosses will never allow it. Pike swears it, and Boba agrees. Then from the background, what we the audience thought was a defeated Pike destroyer droid actually has been lying in waiting without even putting up its own shield. It pounces to attention, and before you know it, stabs Boba in his chest between his armor. The droid is destroyed. Fennec shoots the Pike, and Vanth takes command. He looks at the Pike leader, and Vanth shoots him. So with immense build-up of the show and a great story in place, Boba Fett is defeated. There is great mourning as Boba's armor is stripped to heal his wound, but it's too late. The great Boba Fett's time has come to an end. But now this is where the characters from previous episodes pay off. We hear Tusken Raiders, but like how we've never heard them before. They're marching, but not with weapons, but flame torches. They march through the streets of Tatooine to find Boba Fett. Vanth and Mando understand the Tuskens aren't a threat, but they're somewhat confused. The Tuskens chant and carry Boba Fett back with them into the desert night as everyone from the town comes out and pays their respects to Boba from the streets of Mos Espa. The two suns begin to rise on the horizon. Days pass as Vanth begins to lead the people. They start to rebuild. Fennec and Din join help. And then one morning he looks onto the horizon. There's hundreds of sand people lined up outside the city, all with rifles. They start doing their chanting with their rifles as the Tatooine inhabitants come out to see what the hell is going on. Before the Tusken Raiders shouting synchronize into the Boba Fett campfire chanting, Boba Fett's silhouette appears. Vanth says, well, I'll be damned. Then Boba is escorted by the Sand People to a bantha, and he heads back into the desert to his palace. We then get a montage of Boba by himself passing through the desert, reflecting on his past as his palace comes into view. As slow as the bantha is, it appears that all of Mos Espa is already outside Jabba's palace, Boba's palace. So Boba rides through this parade on a bantha.
Like a bantha.
And his theme gallantly plays. The aliens and people of Tatooine welcome him home as a conquering hero. Some bow, Boba laughs and shakes his head, but he soaks in every single moment of it. Boba Fett has now got a home. So yes, I know that one isn't or anywhere near a simple change. However, it brings the story to a nice fulfilled conclusion. It's been built up to make you feel emotionally charged. There's high stakes and you're fully immersed in all the goodness Tatooine would have to offer. I think of it as a crazy all-out battle on battlefield with Boba Fett at its core leading the people. I think because it's a TV show, it feels like it's scaled back a bit. And yes, my ending version would probably cost another show's worth of budget, but I think it would be worth it rather than the speeder full of people from Mos Pelgo
Freetown.
hiding behind some walls without casualties, and inspired by George Lucas.
Spared no expense.
You have to go all out to make a Star Wars story worth telling. Whether it be the smallest changes to the biggest ones, I think a final epic battle was desperately needed to send the series off with a bang. The Book of Boba Fett needed to feel more like a war with the whole planet involved, so hopefully that would be a change to the ending which would make it feel more like a Boba Fett epic. I loved loved seeing Luke Skywalker and Grogu together. Seeing their training and just being in each other's presence just gave me the absolute feels and made me feel so happy. It was almost as if Yoda was watching over them both, and it really is something so fitting. Yoda trained Luke to then have Luke train a baby Yoda. I think that's magnificent storytelling, and probably why that episode just hit me like no others. I wouldn't change anything really, but only to fit my own selfish vision of how Luke should have been used in the Book of Boba Fett, and particularly in the last episode. It's more so about scope for me. You look at the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, I couldn't imagine Luke there. To me, they don't somehow match. However, I can imagine him on a planet reminiscent to the great atmosphere found on Dagobah, surrounded by ancient forests, huge trees, waterfalls cascading through the temple, tons of green and full of life. And yes, this is where an ancient temple would be, strong in the Force, as if it were always calling out to Luke and Grogu. So that's where Luke decides to build his new Jedi temple. I think something quite large seems a bit more practical to me for training purposes and to keep the planet mysterious and different rather than a planet which I think doesn't carry that Star Wars feel. Not that the planet wasn't beautiful already. Now if this were a movie, I think scope might have been in consideration for Luke's Jedi temple. There are tons of legend references which to me are canon. That could have taken reference from like Jedi Outcast and Jedi Academy, but that's what reminds me that this is a TV show. The scope always seems to be tiny considering how monumentally massive George Lucas made Star Wars. An atmospheric planet, something that could only be in the Star Wars universe, would have lent itself nicely to Luke, as we get to see him surrounded by droids as the ancient temple is constructed into a Jedi temple, combining both old and new. What would have been so cool too if C-3PO was overseeing the logistics and back again with Master Luke and with R2-D2. That would have been really funny and cool. But anyway, that's just a change I'd make to his Jedi temple hut. And with that little detail put aside, I think the last episode, at the end, we should have seen a familiar X-Wing arriving on Tatooine with Luke and Grogu inside. Luke meets with the Mandalorian after the Battle of Mos Espa as he reunites Grogu with the Mandalorian. Mando and him love being back together. Luke sees that, perhaps feeling a little confused and surprised why Grogu chose Din Djarin. Mando updates him on Mos Espa. Luke is surprised that Boba Fett saved the people and senses peace on Tatooine and admits Boba Fett is no longer the person he used to be, and then he sets off. This sets up perfectly Grogu doing special things with the Mandalorian in his final season, which would be a nice touch and tying things up nicely rather than having those moments feature so much in the Book of Boba Fett, because I feel like at this point Boba Fett needs the attention for the show. The reason Luke is looking at Yoda's lightsaber and thinking about Grogu is because change is happening. The Jedi Order is about to evolve with Luke at the helm, where maybe attachments are now allowed, but trained properly by Luke to make sure what happened to his father never happens again, which means Grogu can have attachments, but Luke is going to train him to also be a Jedi, as Luke cares deeply about his friends. As Luke was a Jedi, he cared about his friends, he defeated the Empire, he saved his father, so he wasn't corrupted, so there's hope for a new sort of Jedi. That would be completely awesome. So we cut back to Boba Fett, where he's on Jabba's throne. The palace is bustling with trade, laughter and enjoyment and music. The streets of Mos Espa are safe and bustling. This would be a perfect opportunity for Fennec Shand to ask Boba, so why did you do all this? Then he goes into a long emotional montage on his new-founded morals. Bounty hunting served him well, but a lifetime of conflict, sadness, even he had to change. He talks about having a home and belonging to a family, a big family. Looking after him, being the guardian of Tatooine, he's finally got a purpose because there's something special about this planet. It then cuts to Luke as he's talking. He's walking around the homestead, reminiscing with all of his past. Luke is thinking about Grogu and the Jedi Code. The Jedi say there should be no attachments, but remembers what happened to his father. This is the point he holds out Yoda's lightsaber. Force Ghost Yoda looks at Luke. Luke looks off into the distance as the Mandalorian flies off, and Luke smiles as the sun sets. Cuts back to Boba Fett. Boba Fett looks at Fennec Shand. Something my father told me. It doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, or what you do, you're a Fett, which means you can do anything you want. Cue the music. So I really hope you enjoyed what amounted to be more of a theory or fiction or slight adjustments to what was an already amazing Star Wars show, which already had so many amazing elements in there to make it great fun. So I don't think it was perfect, sure. I think it could have been lacking in various departments, but I cannot deny seeing Boba Fett back as being like a dream come true. I love thinking in my head if George Lucas were involved on the scene, how he might have approached things and tried to continue the great legacy he created with the utmost respect. So that's where my ideas always originate from. So if there's things you'd like to have seen differently in this show, I'd love to hear what you've come up with down below, the changes we'd like to make. But anyway, that's what I would have done for Boba. I hope you liked this video. Subscribe if you're not already. Take care of yourself, and remember, the Force will be with you always.